Your father won't be walking you down the aisle. Those were the exact words my stepmother whispered to me, just 3 days before my wedding. At first, I thought I had misheard her. I actually laughed, a shaky, nervous laugh, thinking maybe it was some kind of cruel joke or a misunderstanding. But then she repeated it, word for word, her voice calm and deliberate, like she wanted to make sure I understood every syllable. He's decided not to do it. Your sister said she feels uncomfortable with the idea, and he doesn't want to upset her. That sentence hit me like a punch in the chest. I froze in place, my stomach twisting into knots. My sister, she was the reason. My own father was choosing not to walk me down the aisle on my wedding day because she didn't like it. I felt my throat close up as I stared at my stepmother, searching her face for any sign of humor, any hint that she was joking. But there was none. Her expression was blank, almost smug, like she was delivering news she had been waiting to drop. At that moment, I felt the world tilt. This wasn't just about a tradition or a simple walk. This was about betrayal, about being abandoned by the one man I had always hoped would stand by my side when it truly mattered. I tried to process it, but memories started flooding in, each one sharpening the pain. My sister, Emily, had never supported me, not once in my life. She had always been the competitor, the one who had to outshine me, the one who craved attention like oxygen. When I got an A in school, she'd cry and accuse me of cheating until my parents bought her a gift to calm her down. When I made friends, she'd spread rumors behind my back to make sure they drifted away from me. And when I got engaged, instead of celebrating with me, she mocked my ring, called it tiny, and made jokes about how long it would last. So hearing that she was uncomfortable with my father walking me down the aisle, that wasn't surprising. It was classic Emily, jealous, controlling, unable to let me have a single moment without making it about her. But what shattered me wasn't her behavior. It was my father's response. I always believed, deep down, that despite everything, my dad would be there for me when it mattered most. That when the wedding march began, and all eyes were on me, he'd proudly hold my arm, walk me to the altar, and give me away with love and dignity. That image had carried me through all the tension, all the family drama, all the pain. It was the one thing I thought was certain. And now he had thrown it away, just like that, because Emily was uncomfortable. I could feel my chest tightening, my hands trembling, as anger, sadness, and disbelief all mixed together. I wanted to scream, "What about me? What about my comfort? What about your daughter who has dreamed of this moment her entire life?" But I couldn't get the words out. My stepmother just looked at me, waiting for my reaction, her lips pressed into a thin line. That night, I sat in my room, staring at my wedding dress hanging on the door. The ivory fabric that had once filled me with joy now looked like a cruel reminder of everything that was falling apart. I had imagined walking down the aisle with my father so many times. His proud smile, the moment he placed my hand in Daniel's, the tears in his eyes. And now that dream was gone. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. The kind of sob that shakes your whole body. The kind that comes from a place so deep, it feels like you'll never stop. I felt betrayed, abandoned, humiliated. How could a father choose one daughter's bitterness over another daughter's happiness? But as the hours passed, my tears slowly turned into something else. Anger, sharp, burning anger. I realized that if my father was willing to let Emily's jealousy dictate such a huge moment in my life, then maybe he never saw me as his priority at all. That thought cut deep, but it also lit a fire inside me. I decided right then, if my father wanted to break me. If he thought I would beg him to reconsider, he was wrong. I wouldn't let him see me fall apart. He had made his choice, and I would make mine. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but one thing was certain. He was going to regret this. Growing up with my sister, Emily, was like living with a constant shadow. No matter what I achieved, she had to remind everyone that she was still there, that she deserved just as much attention, if not more. When I was little and won my first school award for writing, I remember clutching the certificate proudly, my heart swelling, as my teacher praised me. But the moment we got home, Emily burst into tears. She threw herself on the couch, wailing that it wasn't fair, that I always got the attention, and she never did. I was 7, she was 9, and instead of celebrating me, my parents rushed to comfort her. By the end of the night, my mom had taken her out for ice cream, and my dad had bought her a toy just to stop her tantrum. My award, it ended up forgotten on the kitchen table. That was how things always went. If I got good grades, Emily accused me of cheating. If I made friends, she spread rumors to drive them away. If someone complimented me, she'd quickly interrupt to point out one of my flaws. To the outside world, she seemed charming, sweet, even a little shy. But behind closed doors, I saw her for who she truly was. Jealous, manipulative, and determined to outshine me at any cost. As we grew older, the competition only got worse. In high school, when I joined the debate team, Emily suddenly discovered an interest in public speaking. She joined too, not because she cared, but because she couldn't stand the thought of me having something she didn't. When I got my first job, she mocked me for settling for something small, even though she didn't have a job at all. It was exhausting, and yet, I always tried to keep the peace. I thought, she's my sister. That bond has to mean something. I made excuses for her behavior, told myself she'd grow out of it. But instead of growing out of it, Emily grew more bitter. Things reached a new level when I met Daniel. From the moment we started dating, Emily's attitude changed. She'd make little comments, pretending to joke, but cutting me deep. "Don't get too excited. Guys like him don't stick around," she'd say with a fake laugh. When Daniel bought me flowers, she'd roll her eyes and mutter, "Ugh, how cliché." Then came the night he proposed. It was beautiful, simple, heartfelt, everything I had dreamed of. I called my family immediately, tears of joy streaming down my face, and Emily's response, "That's the ring? Wow, it's kind of small, isn't it?" Her words hit me like a slap. It wasn't about the size of the ring. It was about the fact that she couldn't stand seeing me happy. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself she was just hurt because she had gone through a breakup not long before. Maybe seeing me move forward with my life reminded her of what she'd lost. I tried to be understanding, but instead of softening, she doubled down. At family dinners, she'd make sly jokes about how my dress was a little old-fashioned. When we discussed the wedding venue, she'd suggest changes that made no sense, just to insert herself into the process. Once, she even said, "Maybe you should let me try on your dress. What if it looks better on me?" She laughed after saying it, but there was no humor in her eyes. It was clear. Emily wasn't interested in celebrating me. She wanted to sabotage me, to make sure that even on my happiest day, she remained the center of attention. Still, I clung to hope. I told myself that no matter how Emily acted, my father would stand by me. That when the music played and the doors opened, he would take my arm, hold his head high, and walk me proudly down the aisle. That image kept me going, even when Emily's comments cut me to pieces. Because deep down, I believed family meant support. I believed my father would never let me down. But I was wrong. On the biggest day of my life, Emily's comfort somehow mattered more than my happiness, and my father chose her side. That night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. My heart was racing, my chest tight with anger, as I walked into the living room where my dad was sitting with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked calm, like nothing in the world was wrong. Meanwhile, I felt like my entire world was crashing down. "Dad," I began, my voice trembling. "Is it true? Are you really refusing to walk me down the aisle?" He didn't even look up at me at first. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, then finally met my eyes with the same cold, distant expression I had seen so many times growing up. It was the look that told me he had already made up his mind, and nothing I said would change it. "Yes," he said flatly. "Your sister's not comfortable with it. She's sensitive right now. She feels like you're rubbing your happiness in her face. I don't want to upset her." The words sliced through me. My knees nearly buckled, and I had to grip the edge of the couch to steady myself. "Sensitive?" I snapped. "What about me? What about how I feel? This is my wedding day. Why are you letting Emily ruin it?" His jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he might soften, that he might realize how unfair he was being. But instead, he just sighed and shook his head. "You know how Emily gets," he muttered. "It's easier to just keep the peace." I stared at him, stunned. "Keep the peace? At my expense? So you'd rather upset me, your own daughter, on my wedding day, just to keep Emily happy?" He didn't answer. He didn't even look guilty. He just took another sip of his drink and turned his gaze toward the window, as if the conversation bored him. That silence told me everything. In that moment, memories of our past came flooding back, each one sharper than the last. I remembered the school plays where he never showed up because Emily had a dance recital on the same night. I remembered the birthdays where my gifts were small and practical while Emily's were grand and extravagant. I remembered every single time he dismissed my achievements just to make sure Emily never felt overshadowed. I always told myself he loved us both equally, that maybe he just showed it in different ways. But standing there, listening to his silence, I realized the truth. He had always chosen her, and now he was proving it once again, at the most important moment of my life. My heart sank into my stomach. The man who was supposed to protect me, who was supposed to stand proudly by my side, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. "Do you even realize what you're doing to me?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "You're supposed to give me away. You're supposed to be there for me when I take the biggest step of my life. And you're throwing that away for her jealousy." His expression didn't change. If anything, he looked annoyed. "Don't make this dramatic," he said coldly. "It's just a tradition. You'll be fine without me. Just a tradition." Those 3 words shattered me. To him, walking me down the aisle meant nothing. To me, it meant everything. It wasn't just about tradition. It was about love, support, and having my father by my side in a moment I'd dreamed about since I was a little girl. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. He didn't deserve to see me break. Instead, I stood up straighter, forcing strength into my voice, even though my heart was crumbling. "Fine," I said. "If that's how you feel, then don't walk me down the aisle. But remember this moment. Remember that you chose her feelings over my happiness. Remember that you turned your back on me when it mattered most." For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He set down his glass and muttered, "Do what you want," and with that, the conversation was over. I walked back to my room that night feeling hollow, like I had just lost my father even though he was still alive. The silence between us was louder than any argument we could have had. I realized then that no matter how much I begged or reasoned with him, his choice had been made, and it wasn't me. That night, I cried myself to sleep, not just mourning the father I thought I had, but mourning the dream of the wedding I had always imagined. Because now, no matter what happened, it would never be the same. That night, I curled up in bed, my wedding dress hanging silently across the room like a ghost of the dream I had lost. I buried my face into the pillow, trying to muffle the sobs, shaking my body. I didn't want anyone to hear me. Not my stepmother, not Emily, not even my father. But Daniel did. He always did. He slipped into bed beside me and wrapped his arms around me, holding me as though he could shield me from the world's cruelty. His voice was gentle, steady, like an anchor pulling me back from drowning. "You don't need him," he whispered, pressing his forehead against mine. "You're stronger than you think. You don't need anyone who doesn't want to stand by your side." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the pain was too raw. How could my father do this to me? How could he look me in the eye, hear the hurt in my voice, and still choose to abandon me? How could he let Emily, selfish, jealous Emily, dictate something so sacred, so once in a lifetime? The questions spun in my mind like knives, cutting me deeper with every thought. I had always believed that no matter what, parents were supposed to love their children unconditionally. But here I was, days before the biggest moment of my life, realizing my father's love had conditions, and those conditions always revolved around Emily. The pain was unbearable. I cried until my eyes burned, until my chest ached from gasping for breath. Daniel stroked my hair, whispering reassurances. But the more comfort he gave, the more broken I felt. Because deep down, I knew nothing could change what had just happened. But somewhere between the tears and the silence, something inside me began to shift. At first, it was just anger. Hot, bitter anger that made my blood boil. The thought of walking down that aisle without my father, while he sat smugly in the front row next to Emily, made me want to scream. I replayed the conversation in my head over and over. His coldness, his silence, his dismissal of me as though I were a burden. And suddenly I realized something. Maybe he expected me to crumble. Maybe he thought I'd beg him to reconsider, that I'd shrink into myself, too weak to fight back. That thought made me sit up in bed. If my father wanted to embarrass me, if he wanted to strip away my joy by abandoning his role, then he had gravely underestimated me. Because I wasn't weak, I wasn't fragile, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let him, or Emily, steal the spotlight from me on my wedding day. As the anger burned brighter, an idea sparked in my mind. It started small, like a flicker in the dark, but the more I thought about it, the more it grew, until it blazed like a fire in my chest. If he wouldn't walk me down the aisle, then I'd choose someone who actually deserved the honor. I thought of my uncle, my mom's brother, the man who had always treated me with kindness and respect. He never compared me to Emily. He never dismissed me or made me feel small. Every holiday, he asked about my life, my dreams, and he actually listened. He loved Daniel too, often telling me how happy he was to see me with someone who treated me right. Why should I waste my tears over a father who turned his back on me when I had someone like my uncle ready to step into that role? In that moment, the tears dried on my cheeks. My breathing slowed. My heart still ached, but it beat with something new, determination. I realized that my wedding day didn't have to be ruined. In fact, I could take the very thing my father thought would humiliate me and turn it into the most powerful statement of all. I looked at Daniel, who was watching me closely. Concern etched across his face. I smiled through the lingering pain, wiped my eyes, and whispered, "He thinks he broke me, but he's about to regret it." Daniel's lips curved into the smallest smile, and he kissed my forehead. "That's the woman I'm marrying," he said softly. And right then, I knew I wasn't just going to survive this betrayal. I was going to rise above it. My father thought he had taken my power away, but what he didn't know was that he had just given me the strength to take control of my own happiness, and on my wedding day, the world would see it. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding head. My pillow was still damp from the tears I had cried the night before, but something in me felt different. The heaviness was still there, yes, but beneath it was a fire, a flicker of determination that hadn't been there before. I refused to let my father and Emily control my happiness. This was my wedding, my day, and I would not walk down that aisle as a victim of their selfishness. I would walk down it as a bride who chose love, strength, and dignity over betrayal. But the question remained, who would walk me down the aisle? At first, I thought about walking alone. There was a strange kind of power in the image. Me, holding my head high, showing the world that I didn't need anyone. But deep down, I knew the walk wasn't about needing someone. It was about honoring the people who had truly been there for me. And that's when my uncle came to mind. My mum's brother, Uncle David, had always been a steady presence in my life. After my mom passed away, he became a quiet anchor for me. He never tried to replace her, but he always made sure I knew I was loved. When I was little, he was the one who came to my school plays when my dad didn't have the time. He was the one who helped me with math homework, even though he joked that numbers made him dizzy. On my 16th birthday, he was the one who showed up with a cake and balloons when everyone else seemed too busy. And when I introduced him to Daniel, his face lit up. "This guy's a keeper," he had said, clapping Daniel on the back. It was one of the few times in my life I felt like a father figure was proud of me. So why shouldn't he be the one to walk me down the aisle? Why not give that honor to the man who had shown me love and respect, rather than the one who had betrayed me? My hands shook as I picked up the phone that morning. The idea felt right, but I couldn't shake the nervousness. What if he said no? What if he felt it wasn't his place? The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. My heart thudded louder with each ring. And then his familiar voice came on the line, warm and steady. "Hello." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Uncle David, it's me." We talked briefly, but my nerves made it impossible to delay what I had to ask. So I blurted it out before I lost the courage. Would you walk me down the aisle?" There was silence on the other end. My heart sank, and for a split second, I thought I had made a mistake. Maybe he didn't want to step into that role. Maybe it would feel like overstepping. But then I heard him take a deep breath, and his voice cracked slightly as he answered, "It would be my honor." The tears came instantly, hot and fast, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of love. I pressed the phone against my ear, smiling through the sobs. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you so much. You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "You deserve someone who's proud to walk beside you. I'll be there, no matter what." Those words wrapped around me like a blanket, healing wounds that my father had ripped open. In that moment, I realized something powerful. This wedding was no longer about what I had lost. It was about what I still had. As I hung up the phone, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was puffy, my eyes red, but behind all that, I saw strength. I saw a woman who had been hurt, yes, but who refused to let that pain define her. I smiled at myself, a shaky but determined smile. That call had changed everything. My wedding was no longer going to be about my father's betrayal. It wasn't going to be about Emily's jealousy. It was going to be about love, resilience, and the people who truly mattered. For the first time in days, I felt free. I decided then and there, when those doors opened and I walked into that room full of family and friends, I would not be a broken daughter abandoned by her father. I would be a bride who chose her own happiness. And my uncle, the man who had quietly loved and supported me for years, would be the one to walk me proudly into my new life. The big day had finally arrived. The morning sunlight spilled through the windows as I got ready, casting a golden glow across the room. My wedding dress hung gracefully from the wardrobe, its ivory fabric catching the light in a way that made it look almost magical. My heart pounded in my chest, a chaotic mix of nerves and excitement. But this time, it wasn't because of fear. It was because I knew something was about to happen that no one expected. The church was already filling with guests. Laughter, chatter, and the faint sound of heels clicking against the floor filled the air. The florists had outdone themselves. The altar was draped with cascading white roses, and soft music floated from the string quartet, weaving an atmosphere of perfection. And there I was, standing at the back of the church with Uncle David beside me. I clutched his arm, feeling the steadiness in his presence. He smiled at me warmly, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. "You ready?" he asked, his voice calm, almost teasing. I nodded, though my throat was tight, more ready than ever. But then, my eyes flicked to the front row, and my breath hitched. There he was, my father, sitting stiffly, dressed in his best suit, his face arranged in that smug expression I knew too well. Beside him sat Emily, her lips curled in a smirk that screamed satisfaction, like she thought she had already won. The sight of them made my stomach twist. My father looked almost expectant, like he believed at any moment I'd rush down the aisle and beg him to change his mind, to save me from humiliation. He was so sure of himself, so certain that I would fold under the weight of his betrayal. But he was about to learn how wrong he was. The organ began to play, filling the church with its deep, commanding notes. All at once, the room shifted. The guests stood, heads turning toward the back, where I stood with Uncle David. My heart thundered in my chest as the doors creaked open, flooding the aisle with light. I stepped forward. Gasps echoed through the room almost instantly. Everyone had expected me to be on my father's arm. Everyone had assumed that tradition would be followed, even if whispers of tension had spread through the family. But instead, they saw me walking proudly, gracefully, holding on to Uncle David, the man who deserved the honor. The reactions were priceless. Some guests smiled knowingly, their eyes glistening with approval. Others whispered, shocked murmurs rippling through the crowd. But it was my father's face that told the real story. The smugness drained away in an instant. His complexion turned pale. His jaw tightened. And for the first time in my life, I saw him look powerless. His eyes darted between me and Uncle David, as if he couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. And Emily, her smirk vanished, replaced with a scowl so sharp it could cut glass. She leaned closer to my father, whispering something urgently, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, frozen, watching me walk down the aisle without him. With each step, I felt my confidence grow. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it was all still there, but now it was fuel. I held my head high, my veil trailing softly behind me, and smiled at Daniel waiting at the altar. His eyes shone with pride, love radiating from him like sunlight. Uncle David squeezed my hand again, steady and proud, as though silently reminding me, "You are not alone." And in that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't walking toward humiliation. I was walking toward freedom. The aisle felt longer than I remembered, but I cherished every step. By the time we reached the altar, the atmosphere in the church had completely shifted. The guests weren't focused on what was missing. They were focused on what was present: love, strength, defiance. I turned slightly, catching one last glimpse of my father. He still hadn't moved, his face a mask of shock and anger, while Emily glared daggers in my direction. But instead of feeling small, I felt powerful. Because in front of everyone, I had rewritten the script. He thought I'd beg. He thought I'd crumble. But I walked proudly without him. And in that single moment, he was the one left humiliated. After the ceremony, the air was buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of music. The reception hall sparkled with fairy lights strung across the ceiling, and the smell of fresh roses mixed with the scent of the wedding feast. But even with all the beauty around me, I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. My father sat stiffly at one of the front tables, his jaw set tight, Emily glued to his side like a shadow. Every so often, I caught her whispering in his ear, her expression dark and sour. They were waiting for me to stumble, to show weakness. But what they didn't know was that I had been waiting too, waiting for this exact moment. When it was time for speeches, I felt my stomach twist. But I stood up anyway. My legs trembled slightly as I walked toward the microphone, but my grip tightened around it the second it touched my hands. Daniel smiled at me from across the room, his gaze full of encouragement. Uncle David gave me a tiny nod, silently saying, "You've got this." I took a deep breath, looked out at the sea of faces, and began. "I want to start by thanking the man who walked me down the aisle today," I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. I turned and smiled warmly at Uncle David, who sat there beaming like the proudest man alive. Not because tradition demanded it, but because love did. The room went quiet. Guests leaned forward, sensing the weight in my words. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each sentence. A real father figure isn't defined by blood or obligation. A real father figure is someone who stands by you in your happiest and hardest moments. Someone who lifts you up instead of tearing you down. Someone who shows up not because it makes them look good, but because they love you unconditionally. The silence grew heavier. I could feel the eyes of every guest shift toward my father. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly fascinated with the tablecloth, as if looking at me would burn him. I pressed on. That's why today, I wanted to honor my uncle, because when I asked him to walk me down the aisle, he didn't hesitate. He didn't make excuses. He didn't put anyone else's comfort before mine. He simply said, "It would be my honor." I smiled, but it wasn't the sweet smile of a bride. It was sharp, deliberate, a smile that carried truth like a weapon. Across the room, Emily squirmed. She crossed her arms tightly, her face turning red, her eyes darting around as if searching for a place to hide. The smirk she had worn all morning was gone, replaced with the look of someone who had just realized they weren't the star of the story after all. But it was my father's reaction that gave me the greatest satisfaction. His lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes dark, his hands clenching the edges of the table. He couldn't even look at me. For the first time in my life, the man who always spoke with authority, who always expected obedience, had nothing to say, nothing at all. I let the silence sit for a moment, heavy and unflinching. Then I finished, So today, I want to raise a toast, not just to my incredible husband Daniel, but also to the people who choose to be family. Because blood might connect us, but love is what makes us whole. And I am proud to say I stood here, today surrounded by love, not control. Guests erupted into applause. Glasses clinked, cheers filled the room, and some even stood to clap. I caught sight of my mother's friends, nodding approvingly, tears in their eyes. The energy in the room had shifted completely. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was powerful. Meanwhile, my father sat frozen, his face pale, his pride shattered in front of everyone he had hoped to impress. And Emily, she looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. And that was the moment I knew I had finally taken back my voice. From that day forward, something inside me shifted permanently. My wedding wasn't just the start of a marriage. It was the moment I finally broke free from years of my father's control and Emily's manipulation. The days after the ceremony were strange. I woke up as a wife, yes, but also as a woman who had stood her ground publicly, in front of the very people who once thought I'd always bend to family pressure. The messages and calls came pouring in from relatives and guests. Some told me how brave I was. Others admitted they had always suspected my father favored Emily, but had never said it out loud. For the first time, people saw the truth without me having to beg them to believe it. And my father, his silence spoke louder than anything. He didn't call right away, didn't send congratulations, didn't acknowledge the vows or the joy of the day. But eventually he reached out, tentatively, awkwardly, as if unsure how to face me after being so thoroughly exposed. He left a message on my phone. I think we should talk, but I didn't call back, not because I wanted revenge, but because I had finally learned a painful truth. Sometimes, the bond of blood isn't enough. A father who chooses pride over love, silence over support, favoritism over fairness, well, that isn't a father I need in my life. For months, he kept trying in small ways. He sent a birthday card, then a text at Christmas. But every gesture felt empty, too little, too late. Each time I saw his name pop up on my screen, I felt nothing but a hollow ache. I remembered the look on his face at my wedding, the shock, the humiliation, the regret. And I realized that regret wasn't mine to carry. It was his. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to shrink after that day. Her smugness was gone. Her ability to twist situations in her favor had crumbled. It was as if the speech at my wedding had pulled the curtain back and revealed her true nature to everyone. She tried a few times to bait me afterward with her usual snide comments, but they rolled off me like water off glass. She no longer had the power to control me, and deep down, she knew it. In a way, I pitied her. She had spent so much of her life competing with me, needing to be the center of attention, desperate for validation. But I had learned that real happiness doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from standing tall in your own truth. And me? I walked away from that wedding day, transformed, stronger, freer, loved in ways that went beyond the bonds of family politics. Daniel and I built our life together on a foundation of respect and loyalty, the very things my father had failed to give me, and every anniversary, every milestone we've shared since, has been a quiet reminder that love rooted in honesty will always outlast love rooted in control. My father thought he could humiliate me by stepping away from his role, by making me beg for his approval. But in the end, it was the opposite. He was the one left sitting in regret, watching as his daughter found strength without him. He had hoped to prove that I needed him, that without his presence, I would crumble. Instead, I proved that I could rise higher than ever without his hand to hold. To this day, he lives with that choice. I don't know if he regrets it every single day, but I do know this: regret is heavy, and it belongs to him, not me. I started my new life with dignity, with love, and with a freedom that tasted sweeter than anything I had ever known. My wedding wasn't ruined. It was rewritten. It became not just the story of a marriage, but the story of a woman who finally chose herself. And that is a choice I will never regret.